The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We have more news from North Korea. Vice is reporting that more than 50 North Korean submarines, which is about 70% of North Korea's known fleet, have reportedly left their bases and disappeared from South Korea's military radar. This was after an announcement from the two Koreas that they would be lifting the semi-state of war, which started with this landmine explosion that injured two South Korean soldiers on August 4th, followed up by a single shell fired towards the propaganda loudspeakers as described by North Korea. And a spokesman for South Korea's defense ministry reportedly said that the North's mass submarine deployment is unprecedented and that both the United States and Seoul are increasing military surveillance. The most shocking thing about this report, Lewis, to many people that have emailed me, is that North Korea even has this number of submarines, although admittedly, most of these are very, very small compared to what we think of as the American military submarine.
Yeah, I'm not sure about their capabilities, their naval capabilities. I mean, I don't see it as that big of a threat. Some of these are probably pretty old. Where did they purchase all of these from? The Russians, the Chinese? I'm not really sure.
Seoul previously accused North Korea of torpedoing a South Korean warship 5 years ago in an attack that killed 46 people. Pyongyang officially denied responsibility, although South Korea maintains that it was indeed the North. There is going to be, I just don't know at this point what is going to happen here. Is this the real thing? We've talked many times about the sort of coincidence, if you want to call it that North Korea starts to get a little belligerent in this way when they are in particular need of some kind of aid. And then all of a sudden there's an arrangement made for aid to be received by North Korea, and then things calm down. Some experts, including some who have followed North and South Korean politics very closely, are saying that this already has a sort of different feel, particularly with regard to these 50 submarines. But we should never put anything past the North Korean regime. And in that sense, I mean both, that they would go further than they've gone before merely because they need aid, and at the same time that they would arbitrarily decide now is the time when we start a real military engagement with South Korea.
Yeah, they're capable of anything. And I guess, somewhat predictable normally, but if the experts are saying this is a little bit different, well, I guess, we should be careful. I kind of, I shouldn't say this, but as I've said many times, I think only a major conflict would help the people of the country ultimately.
I was in touch with friend of the show, David Sparks, who's from Ohio the other day, and he told me that a man named John Felton, who's a Black American, posted a video to his Facebook page of being pulled over by police in Dayton, Ohio, and ultimately told that he was pulled over for making direct eye contact with the police officer. This is absolutely crazy. John Felton posted on Facebook that Dayton police trailed him for almost 2 miles before pulling him over in front of his mom's house. The initial reason, and I don't know that anybody has played this video, Lewis. This is something that was sent to us directly. I've been in touch with John Felton, who is the man in the video. He initially asked about why he was pulled over. And he was pulled over, as I'll play for you, not because he didn't use his turn signal, but because the officer believed he didn't use his turn signal 100 feet before initiating the turn. We're talking about a technicality of technicalities here. Here's part 1 of the video.
How y'all doing today?
Good.
My name is Officer Bessie, Dayton Police Department. The reason I'm pulling you over today, sir, is because you didn't signal 100 feet prior to your turn. I saw you turned your turn signal on, but you didn't turn it on 100 feet prior.
Did I say he was going to do all this? I watched you trail me the whole time. I said, well, I don't know why this cop is behind me. I'm glad I got my video camera on too.
Well,
I did signal.
Okay.
I did signal. You just needed a reason to
I'm
pull me
acknowledging
over.
that you did signal. Okay, I'm acknowledging that you signaled. You didn't do it 100 feet prior to your turn.
You just needed a reason to pull me over, sir.
Okay.
Is there a reason other than that? Because I did signal.
Do you have your license and insurance on you, sir?
I have everything.
Okay.
So after this, the officer goes back to the police car, eventually comes back, and reveals the real reason why he chose to pull Mr. Felton over. Mr. Felton having a sense that this explanation, well, you signaled, but it wasn't exactly 100 feet before you turned. And now it turns out that there was another factor here that made the officer pull over Mr. Felton. I will warn you, there is some strong language here. Take a look.
No disrespect, I don't have nothing against police officers, but all the shit that's going on now, that's some scary shit. To have a police officer just trailing you, and then you just pull me because you said I didn't signal. What? Do you know how that looks? You drive without being in the cop car, right? You know how it is when the police pulling you over. You're like, I'm not doing nothing. Why is he? Every move I make, why is he making it? I'm not doing nothing. Okay. Because I have a Michigan plate. Other than that, why was you trailing me?
Because you made direct eye contact with me and held onto it when I was passing you on Salem.
I made direct. I didn't even see you.
I'm not going to argue that anymore, sir. If you want to keep talking about it, I'll just take your license back and give you a citation for the violation. We can take it to court.
That's right. Because you made direct eye contact with me. A stunning admission, Lewis. Direct eye contact, and you get pulled over. Is direct eye contact considered probable cause or suspicious activity now?
I think in this case, I'm not sure if the explanation was that he started trailing this man because of the eye contact, or he basically pulled them over because of the eye contact. We can say with certitude that the trailing started because of eye contact. And, I would assume that his superiors would condemn this. It's pretty absurd.
If they even became aware of it. As David Sparks told me, other notably racially tinged incidents involving police in Dayton recently. John Crawford was shot in Beaver Creek, Ohio, which is about 15 miles from Dayton. Kylan English, who police claim broke out the back window of a cruiser and propelled himself while handcuffed out of the window of a cruiser and ran and jumped off a bridge. That is another story from the Dayton, Ohio area. And David Sparks himself saying he gets a lot of complaints all the time about street harassment. His wife is black, and he says that she was stopped several times just driving to her parents' house. They live in an upper income, mostly white suburb. And David saying that this sort of flare up with Dayton and Dayton area police is not uncommon. There it is. The reason for this, whether it's the traffic stop or even just initially starting to trail Mr. Felton, because he made direct eye contact with a police officer. And it's funny because noticeably avoiding eye contact with police is also considered something by some police to be suspicious. In either way, you're arguably doing something suspicious.
Yeah, pretty amazing that despite knowing that he was being recorded, he admitted that the trailing started because of this eye contact, like as if that's some type of normal thing that's just, perfectly okay.
A new anti-LGBT organization has posted a short attack ad against transgender women who want to use the women's restroom. David Badash over at the New Civil Rights Movement is all over this. I'll play the 30-second audio spot for you. It'll run for 2 weeks in the Houston market at a cost of $100,000, and it features the voice of a young woman attacking the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, HERO, on which voters will decide in November. Take a listen to the very nice ad hominems in this ad. Here we go.
No men in women's bathrooms. Let me tell you why. One day, I hope to be pregnant and deliver my beautiful baby right here in Houston. But I'm concerned because the city of Houston is proposing an ordinance that will allow men to use the women's bathrooms and locker rooms. We are being told that the ordinance will prevent discrimination against pregnant women. That makes absolutely no sense. There are already federal and state laws that prohibit discrimination against pregnant women. But this ordinance will allow men to freely go into women's bathrooms, locker rooms, and showers. That is filthy, that is disgusting, and that is unsafe. Join me and other women in Houston.
Yeah, join her. The group sponsoring the ad is called the Campaign for Houston. It's headed by Jared Woodfill, who's a 47-year-old attorney and former chairman of the Republican Party of Harris County, Texas. The website was down as of this morning, but the archived version says that the group is comprised of Houston citizens, quote, of all races, creeds, and political beliefs. Somehow, while that may be true on paper, I assume it is true. I assume it is not true in spirit. Let me be very direct here. If transgender women in women's restrooms outrages you, it's time to recalibrate that outrage meter because it's not reading very accurately. Inequality, big corporations paying no taxes, Meanwhile, we have no health care and college education is unaffordably expensive. And you're worried about transgender women in women's bathrooms. It's amazing to me that people have been bamboozled enough by these divisive fake issues to be distracted from the real issues facing this country, to instead make radio ads, Lewis, saying transgender women in the women's bathroom is vile or disgusting or whatever they call it.
I have a hard time imagining being one of these people who is just terrified or outraged at something like this. I think there's a lot of cowardice here and a lot of insecurity as well.
Just the other day, I was in the men's bathroom and there was a transgender man in the men's bathroom. And you know what, Lewis? It had absolutely no impact on me whatsoever. There was a father in there with his son. The son was completely unaffected, was able to urinate freely in the bathroom. Nothing happened. There was no confusion. There was no violence. There was no incitement to scandal of any sort whatsoever. I actually just completely forgot about it because this is not a big deal. And I'm more concerned with who's going to be our next president. Are we going to have a serious conversation about the real problems facing the United States moving forward? Those are the things I think about when I think about political activism, not keeping transgender women out of women's bathrooms.
Yeah, and here's a question for you. Do you think that kid who was also in the bathroom even had any idea that this was happening?
No.
Or do you think that kid was probably just thinking about Lucky Charms and video games?
The kid had no idea whatsoever. It was an absolute non-issue, as we know it has been in every state that has these provisions allowing those who, allowing people to use the bathroom for the gender they identify as. Period. Full stop. We'll take a break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by the audience through the David Pakman Show membership program. Today's new member of the day is Benita Pierce. Thank you, Benita, for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Benita at davidpakman.com/membership. We have talked a little bit about people getting very religious around Donald Trump's campaign. Yesterday, we talked about a woman at that insane Alabama rally with a "Thank Lord Jesus for President Trump" sign. Now, according to KSDK, Jan Castellano of Wildwood, Missouri, contacted them claiming that Donald Trump's face appeared to her in a tub of New Earth organic spread. She opened up her new package of Earth Origins organic spread to find an image of Donald Trump in her butter. I saw this and I thought, I cannot believe that that is not butter, Lewis.
Well, I believe it. I think it's just butter. And I suspect nothing supernatural happening here.
I'm actually shifting my support on the Republican side to a Huckabee butter ticket because a tub of butter is still a better presidential candidate than Donald Trump.
I think we're in agreement there. I would pretty much pick any inanimate object over Donald Trump.
I have to tell you, it looks, if I'm going to say the butter looks like anything, it looks more like a little baby than Donald Trump.
I'm not sure what it looks like. I mean, I can kind of see a little bit of Trump in there, but you have to really strain to see that. You know, the mind just sees whatever it wants to see.
Well, like I've said before, the lard works in mysterious ways.
Very good, Dave. Yes. Did you come up with that one?
I saw Ben Carson in my hair gel yesterday.
It's better than seeing Ben Carson in the mirror, I guess.
Saudi Arabia now executing one person every 2 days, including kids and the mentally disabled. Our great ally, Saudi Arabia, is executing one person every 2 days, and the number of beheadings is soaring. At least 175 people executed in the past year in Saudi Arabia, according to a report by Amnesty International. The kingdom killed 102 convicted criminals in the first 6 months of 2015 alone, which puts it on track to beat its previous record from 1995. Those killed include children under the age of 18 at the time of the offense and people suspected of having mental disabilities. Nearly half of those killed were foreign nationals who Amnesty International says are disproportionately suffering under the Saudi justice system because of two things. Number one, xenophobic prejudice in Saudi Arabia, and also the lack of understanding of the proceedings in Arabic in Saudi Arabia. A lot of these, Lewis, for drug-related offenses, and death sentences have been given for crimes like adultery, apostasy, and witchcraft. This is one of the best friends of the United States.
And I don't see that changing for some time. It's really unfortunate. What are we going to do? Honestly, being allies with this country has its benefits, and it may be important to maintaining stability in the Middle East. Maybe we just have to deal with this. Is that a possibility?
Well, this is certainly the argument that everybody who's up for keeping this partnership and this alliance going are making, right? And it's even more egregious than what I've told you. I mean, that some of these executions are being carried out in public. Some of them are beheading. So Saudi Arabia is not only putting people to death for sorcery, for example, but they are beheading people in public. This is the depraved of the depraved among countries that still have the death penalty.
Yeah, and I'm trying to imagine how many people are being jailed over ridiculous reasons as well. I mean, if this many executions are happening, how many people are being jailed over this garbage?
Well, some other news from Saudi Arabia that maybe is a little more positive. Women have finally been allowed to vote and register for elections for the first time in the 100-year history of what we call modern Saudi Arabia. They will also be able to be candidates for election. According to the Foreign News Agency, women will finally get a chance to vote starting in the election scheduled for December. The media has stated that the announcement of this was actually made in 2011 by King Abdullah, and that now it is going to be put into effect. This, I guess, is going to boost the limited rights that women have in Saudi Arabia. But at the same time, we have to remember that Saudi Arabia does not really have free, legitimate elections in the sense that you get to vote for your local council, and that's it. And those councils have very limited power. The royal family really wields the power in Saudi Arabia. You can kind of say that you have these elections and it lets them tout how progressive they are, but they don't really give up any authority to these local councils, Lewis. So is it a sign of progress that on paper women will be allowed to vote? Yeah, it's 2015, but do these votes even make a difference? Broadly speaking, no.
No, it's still a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. No one can see your face when you go out to vote, but you're still allowed to vote. And if you are running for office or council as a woman, are people allowed to see your face then? I mean, how does that work?
These are all very fair questions. And let me remind you that it's pretty similar in Qatar, which is going to have a World Cup, which we've said numerous times should not happen. And we're still hopeful that the World Cup will be taken away from Qatar. They have the Shura Council in Qatar. They get to register their opinion and they can make recommendations to the government for action or for taking a position on an issue. Absolutely no real power. Maybe they get to decide, I don't know, where the speed bumps go. And this is a pretty ingenious way of sort of sedating the population that doesn't really have a sense that this is not democracy, right? Being able to vote for these councils that have essentially no power, it might make you think that you're participating in a democracy, and really it's not.
It isn't, but perhaps if you have to keep, making small changes like this over time, maybe it does lead to an actually more democratic society.
Yeah, you just might need 10,000 years to notice the change.
You might, but hey, if that happens in 10,000 years, at least it happens.
After the break, I will interview Republican presidential candidate Mark Everson. Haven't heard of him? A lot of people haven't. We'll talk to him about why that is.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Mark Everson, who's a Republican presidential candidate who has served in the Reagan and Bush administrations in capacities that included the U.S. Information Agency, the Department of Justice, INS, IRS. I've been interested, Mark, in following some of the mailings from your publicist or the person that helped get you on our show today. And you've been doing a lot of talking about Hillary Clinton and her email. And I'm interested, as a Republican presidential candidate who's trying to sort of make headway in the primary, why the choice to talk about Hillary Clinton's email?
Well, I initially wrote a piece on this way back when this story broke, not more recently. I was very concerned about it because I think it's an issue of transparency. While the security issues are important, I am more concerned about the transparency in the sense that you had the Secretary of State who was interacting with a lot of private parties. And because all of these interactions were kept on a private server, and then she took the decision as to what should be retained or not, we don't know, for example, whether she was interacting with large banks. And Jamie Dimon was saying, geez, we could sure use a reset with Russia. Or we don't know whether the oil companies were suggesting that we needed to change our strategy in the Mideast. So it's just that job is so all-encompassing. I was very concerned not only about the classification issues, which are real, but about the interactions that we'll now never know about.
So I sort of have questions along two lines with this. One is whether discussing that issue is going to help your candidacy within the Republican primary, but also I'm curious to get your reaction to the revelations we got, for example, back in May, when former Secretary of State Colin Powell said, I actually also used a personal email. It was a very similar situation to that of Hillary Clinton. An aide to Colin Powell confirmed this. We've also since pointed out the sort of double standard with regard to the Bush White House, where in 2007, we found out that there were millions of emails, quote, lost or possibly even deleted, as Greg Palast has reported on many times. There seems to be a huge double standard in that nobody seems to care about those.
I don't think that's the case. Those were all written about at the time. So I think that the intentional use of a server off the property for all of the communications, that is unprecedented as far as I know. And again, I think that this could have all been dealt with when the issue first came up. She said, okay, server now, let's have the government people go in and they make the call. Listen, I've worked in the government, as you indicate, two different administrations, Reagan and Bush, and the second Bush, that is. And you have people who are experts in what needs to be produced or not. They're not going to, in any way, shape, or form, they've been over backwards to make sure that the personal stuff is not disclosed. So I don't know what her sensitivity was to this, and we have clear instances. I mean, the Wall Street Journal did a big story, I'm sure you saw it a couple weeks ago, about the interaction between the secretary and UBS. And as soon as a deal was cut on the disclosure of, this is a tax question, how many Americans IRS and the Department of Justice, 1.5 million in speaking fees came in, or donations to the foundation came in the year or two right after that. So these are events that I certainly think need to be looked at.
Okay, so I guess that will sort of communicate to our audience why you think this story is important. So now let's contextualize this a little bit within your candidacy. You have, as much of our audience will probably recognize, many members of our audience have not heard of you. Why have you not been able to sort of make headway into the national dialogue within the Republican primary? People may notice you were absent from both the first and second tier debate that Fox News held in conjunction with Facebook a couple of weeks ago. So what's going on right now with the Mark Everson campaign?
Well, I announced back in March, and I have an active operation. I'm speaking to you from Iowa. We've been in about a third of the counties now, something like 30 counties doing events. I'll be again in New Hampshire soon. And so it's an active on-the-ground campaign in a very traditional way, reaching out to people. But your viewers can go to Mark, M-A-R-K, F-O-R, America.com, and they can see the entire agenda. It hangs together. I think it's attractive to conservatives, but because of my stance on the Constitution. I speak to, I say, you can look at my record. I execute the laws as written, not as I might wish them to be. I part company with this administration, not just on policy, but also on what I think is executive branch overreach. And,
no, well, I appreciate you telling our audience how they can find out more about you. But you're answering a question I didn't ask, Mark.
Yes, I know, and I'm getting to your question. So
okay.
Give me a second. So I think that I communicate to that core conservative group, but also to a broader audience because of some of the other positions. Now, if you look at all that, though, you're in a crowded field. When I took a look at this, I think I did the correct diagnosis, which was to say people wanted a non-traditional candidate. I have the executive branch experience, I have industry experience, but not political background. And I felt that that was a good calling card. However, I didn't anticipate the arrival of Mr. Trump, who has, if you will, he has taken that card and then some. So I think that is difficult to get attention. Now, if your people go to the RNC website, you'll see that for months, I've been carried as one of 18, not 17 candidates that are recognized in their straw poll. But it's a question of getting the attention of the mainstream media who are satisfied with their 17.
And Mark, are you saying, to go back to your mentioning of Donald Trump, are you saying that were it not for the attention Donald Trump is getting, that you would be getting far more attention? Is that your contention?
I think that you can never guarantee anything, but I think that obviously many candidates are sort of starved for what would be, I think, interest right now, because he creates such a furor, and fair enough, because what he's done is he's tapped into that discontent with politicians. Now, I do not like the way he provokes arguments, and I think he's very divisive, and it's unhealthy for our democracy. But you do have to respect or recognize the fact that what he's done is he's drawn the media attention to himself.
And you respect that from Donald Trump?
I don't respect the way he's doing it, but what he's adroitly recognized that frustration. But I have a real problem. I condemned him after he gave his opening speech about anti-immigrant speech, as we all recall, even before he criticized McCain, who, by the way, George Washington and Winston Churchill were both captured, so they're pretty much, I guess they weren't heroes either.
Well, let's talk a little bit of, I like that you're talking about the immigration part, because I was checking out your campaign platform, and one of the things you talk about is the reinforcing of the American tradition of assimilation through immigration reform. Talk about that. How would you restructure immigration in order to reinforce assimilation? That's interesting to me.
Well, you just look at a quarter. On one side it says, "In God we trust." What does it say on the other side? It says, "E pluribus unum." That is our tradition, from many one. And right now, if we're going to get after immigration reform, I think we need to certainly control the borders. And I ran operations at the INS under President Reagan, so I know this issue well. I supervised the Border Patrol. I supervised the detention and deportation operations. So yes, we need to strengthen the borders, absolutely.
And what does that mean? How would you, let's be very specific here.
You can do more physical security. You can work to strengthen the Border Patrol. You also can look at visa issuance, because as you undoubtedly know, many people overstay their visas. The second piece, though, is you need to put in E-Verify. That is why the 86 Act failed. It's because an employer is off the hook if someone presents documentation that appears legitimate. What the E-Verify system would do, and what the Senate bill that passed before mandated, was that employers would check and substantiate that someone was who they say they are by going to the government database. If they do that, then what will happen is it'll choke off future illegal immigration, because you won't have that magnet effect with the jobs. Once you do those two things, you're left with the question of what to do with the 10 or 12 million people who are here.
Right.
And they came illegally, or they overstayed their visa. If they're a criminal alien, and by that I don't mean a violation of their immigration status, I mean they've engaged in other serious criminal activity, get them out of here, I say.
And that's already the law, right? I mean, if even in states where you can't stop someone merely to inquire about their legal status immigration-wise, if a crime has been committed, at that point it opens the door and you can inquire into their legal status.
Yeah, and part of this is not only about problems with sanctuary cities, it's also a problem with ICE not doing its job properly. So you can get DHS to be more efficient here. But the point is, as a policy matter, yes, absolutely, those criminal aliens should be returned to wherever they came from. But you're left with a population of people who are intertwined with our communities. They're producing economically. I want those people to have a path to citizenship, and I say that for two reasons. One, I can tell you, having run the system, you're not going to have these mass deportations. That would be disruptive. It would rip our society apart, and it would change our legal system in ways that would be very negative. So that's one point, and you're not going to disrupt the economy that way. But the second point is, again, it's what you started out with. I want us all in together. I want everybody thinking about America first. And I've lived overseas in Turkey, in France, and in Zambia. And I can tell you that in a place like France, there is no culture of assimilation. And they are struggling mightily to confront radical Islam. So I think that if we're gonna prevail in this great global contest, we need to be all in it together. So yes, I want those people all on the same team as everybody else.
Yeah, but the problem I have, Mark, is that you're using sort of amorphous language in the sense that you could say, yeah, we should all be on the same team, sure, but you're also sort of not being specific in the sense that pushing assimilation can be a pretty ugly and authoritarian thing. And while we don't have the time to get into every bit of minutia here, just saying we all need to be on the same team could open the door to some pretty ugly sort of forced assimilation tactics that I don't think a lot of people in either party would like to see.
I think you're resisting American tradition of people learning English one generation to the next. That is our American culture and tradition, which has worked just fine over the centuries. So I don't think it's overbearing at all. I think it's far more dangerous to be divisive as we are being here. And it's not only Trump here. I think the president erred in his executive order. He went beyond his authority, and he made it harder, frankly, for us to get immigration reform through that act.
But wouldn't you agree that one of the most divisive powers or influencers right now is the incredible inequality of our economy, which disproportionately affects the immigrants and the minority groups that you're talking about? Wouldn't it be a huge unifying influence if we were able to reduce that inequality? And that's not an element of this assimilation that I hear you talking about.
Well, we didn't talk about what I'm speaking about for economics. And to get to the path to prosperity, I espouse three things. First, to reform our tax code. And what I suggest is that we put in a consumption tax, and that you could take 150 million Americans off the income tax rolls. And you can lower taxes for the higher end earners who would remain in the income tax rolls, and lower the business tax. And the nice thing about this proposal is that it's revenue neutral, meaning it brings in the same amount of money. It's also distributionally neutral, so that the folks who are at the high end pay about as much, the folks in the middle pay about as much, and the folks at the lower end pay about as much. I also say we need to reform our lending institutions, get the community banks to be lending again, to create jobs in small and mid-sized businesses. So if those folks in the private sector have good paying jobs, we need to hold the big banks accountable. I really think it's atrocious, the consolidation we've had in the mega banks. And under this administration, they haven't held the big banks accountable. They've levied fines, but what happens is the banks, they run the light, they pay the ticket and drive on. So we need to revise the financial sector. If the banks are too big to fail, that just means they're too big. And then we need to get the spending under control, because if we don't do what O'Neill and Reagan did back in the 80s and make meaningful entitlement reforms, the entitlement programs will swallow us whole in the out years. I'll be 61.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a ton of stuff you mentioned there. We certainly are completely out of time. The first thing you talked about, reforming the tax code in the way that you mentioned, is completely regressive, and any serious economist understands that it absolutely does not work. You're talking about reducing taxes on the wealthy and then instituting a flat consumption tax, which is effectively regressive.
Have you looked at my proposal? It has been vetted by nonpartisan institutions. It is authored by Michael Gratz. The benefit of it is that it is not regressive at all. Please study it up before you levy a charge like that, because you're dead wrong. That's the beauty of it. It's distributionally neutral. I just said it. Take a look at it. Go to the Michael Gratz's articles on it. That's the reason I espouse.
But Mark, do you understand how something can be nominally distributionally neutral, yet still effectively regressive? Just conceptually, just so we can see if we even agree
What's
on
your
that.
background to know about this? Do you know anything about tax?
My background is undergraduate and graduate degrees in economics.
Very good. We'll take a look at the Gratz proposal, and I'm sure you'll agree then, because of the credits he provides through the offset to the payroll taxes, that the people at the lower end will be whole. That's the whole benefit. It's not regressive.
All right, I'm going merely on what you said. I have not reviewed the proposal. I will do so, but and then we will have you back and discuss that. Mark Everson, Republican presidential candidate. Will he be in the next debate? Only time will tell. Mark, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I've told you about Elon Musk's idea for the Hyperloop transport system. It kind of sounds like science fiction, but it is becoming more and more real every month. It's looking less and less crazy every month as well. Hyperloop Transportation Technologies announced that it has now signed agreements with Oerlikon Leibold Vacuum and global engineering firm AECOM. The two companies are going to get involved, lending their expertise in exchange for stock options in the company. And they are going to join Boeing engineers, SpaceX engineers who are ready to also get involved. The idea is this network of above ground tubes that could span hundreds or thousands of miles. They have very low air pressure inside the tubes. And there's these sort of capsules filled with people which can move very, very quickly, near supersonic speeds. And the timing of this could not be better. It lines up with the beta launch of Jumpstart Fund, which is a company that combines elements of crowdfunding and crowdsourcing to tackle projects like rebuilding and creating revolutionary transportation infrastructure. So the startup plans to start construction on a full-scale, passenger-ready Hyperloop next year. This will be just a 5-mile track. It'll run through Quay Valley, which is a planned community that is going to be along Interstate 5, halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. This is very, very cool. I love stuff like this.
Yeah, who doesn't? If this were to become an actually popular mode of transportation, I mean, this beats trains, this beats cars, this beats planes. I'm really hoping that something actually comes of this.
We are so embarrassingly behind on trains and public transport outside of cities in general. Many cities have great public transit systems within the cities, but not that many have. We don't have that much great public transit for outside of cities. And every time you hear a new idea like this, the reaction from the haters is pretty similar. The first thought is, it's impossible, it's impractical, it's too expensive, it'll never work. Then they move on to, okay, conceptually this is possible, but it's still expensive and way too dangerous. Then they move on to, okay, you figured out how to fix the safety concerns and we figured out how to afford this, but the legal implications are just far too complicated. And then you skip forward, Lewis, to when it's a reality, and then they take to complaining that the Wi-Fi on board is a little bit too slow.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will be very expensive, and who knows how long it will be before one of us can access this method of transportation. But it's fascinating, and of course, this is what we need, or something similar. We need alternatives.
Lewis, we've talked about the huge trend and fad around gluten-free diets. And we've talked many times about how there is only sporadic research that says non-celiac gluten sensitivity is a real thing. So of course, if you have celiac disease, you can be tested for that, and you absolutely should not have gluten. There's a lot of ambiguity, though, around, well, I really felt sick when I used to have gluten and I stopped and now I feel better. There's a paper that came out last year in the Journal of Gastroenterology, and it has essentially told us that the gluten sensitivity that Peter Gibson at Monash University in Australia thought existed may not actually exist at all. So in 2011, the experiment was done, and the so-called non-celiac gluten sensitivity was found to be a real thing. However, there was a follow-up study done by the same researchers, and they found that it actually may not exist. So this doesn't disprove it completely, Lewis, but it is another piece of evidence that says, oh, one of those original studies saying non-celiac gluten sensitivity exists has been redone, and it's seeming a lot less likely that it exists. Does this surprise you? Do you believe that non-celiac gluten sensitivity is real?
Not really, because I haven't observed that with anything else. I mean, with lactose, okay, either you are lactose intolerant or you aren't, and there may be different degrees of that, but I don't think anyone has like a lactose sensitivity.
Well, but isn't that sort of what is being said here? You don't, your sensitivity to gluten isn't bad enough to test positive for celiac, but you have some degree of sensitivity. Isn't that conceptually similar?
I mean, in this case, I would say either it's an allergy or it's not. I don't see how it could be called a sensitivity because that just doesn't make sense to me. Either you have an allergic reaction to it or you don't.
There's a couple thoughts I have on this. Number one, I have many friends who say they're allergic or intolerant to gluten. And when I ask them whether they've actually had a double-blind test of whether gluten creates symptoms for them, the answer is no. And if we're really talking about evidence-based, that's the way you need to do it. You are given sample diets or sample foods where both you and the tester don't know until after the fact which have gluten. Putting that aside for a second, there's another component to this, which is you may not actually be sensitive to gluten. Let's say you have symptoms when you have gluten-laden foods. It may not be placebo effect, first of all. It may not be psychosomatic. And it may not be a sensitivity to the gluten, but there may be other irritating chemicals in high gluten diets that are what is irritating you, and that is what has not been sussed out. Now, some of these chemicals, like FODMAPs, were adjusted for in this new study, but there may be others. So I'm sort of keeping an open mind about it, Lewis. But when you actually do double-blind gluten sensitivity tests, most of the evidence suggests this is not a real thing, and this is not an insult to all of the people I know personally who say they are gluten sensitive. I completely believe them that when they cut out gluten, they felt better, but I do believe that we need double-blind studies to really see if this is a thing.
Yeah, and for some of those people who said they just have a sensitivity, maybe it wasn't. Maybe you actually are allergic and you are a celiac. That could be the case as well.
Yeah, except that that's usually far more violent in terms of the reaction that you have to consuming gluten.
Yeah, usually. But I suppose there are more mild allergic reactions.
Send me your thoughts on this. What do you think about the recent trend towards gluten-free diets? 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Here's a funny voicemail we got.
Yes, I love watching your show, David, because it makes me realize where the money is going for these colleges to support, to make you the way you are. You are such a jerk. I find that you're so offensive. You're a punk who thinks he knows it all. You can't hold a candle to any politician or anybody that you criticize. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, this might be the most childish voicemail we've ever received. You're such a jerk, David. I mean, if it's a very flaccid criticism, isn't it?
I guess so. Also that you don't hold a candle to anyone you criticize. That's a little more imaginative.
And yeah, so but I guess we don't really need to comment more, but well, let me comment on one other part. I am very much aware of so many things that I don't know. I really do realize a lot of the stuff I don't know, and I think that's actually one of the better parts of this show, right? That we are willing to do interviews and investigate things that we know we don't know that much about with the idea of learning more, which I think is commendable.
Yeah, of course. We are truth seekers and we like to learn. And for example, we don't know anything about, quantum mechanics, right?
I would love to learn more, though. There's no question about that. On today's bonus show, we will talk about the Ashley Madison hack in the context of John McAfee from McAfee Virus Scan. Protesters in Houston target an Arabic immersion school. And Lewis has an infuriating video game experience. What could it possibly be? All of those stories and more on the bonus show. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.